Hey y'all, this is Jessica Gray, a part of our Orchard Family podcast. I hope you tuned in last week where Alex and Will kind of introduced our disciplines that we're going to be talking about in this podcast. We're so excited that you would join us. We would love for you to like and subscribe to this podcast so you keep knowing when we're having them, you keep listening. This week we are diving into the discipline of fasting. Thanks for joining.
Hey, welcome to the Orchard Family Podcast, Lent edition. We're so glad that you are here, whether you're tuning in through video or podcast, just listening in. My name is Alex. I'm one of the pastors in Oxford. I'm here with my friends.
I'm Jessica.
And I'm Wes Strickle.
We're
both in Tupelo.
There you go. Awesome. I'm so glad that y'all are here as well as we are diving into this Lent series, talking about some of the spiritual disciplines. So last week we talked with Will Rambo about kind of an overview of all of the disciplines and why they're important, why we should pursue them, why we should take them seriously. And with each of these episodes after that, we're going to kind of deep dive a little bit, as much as our shorter conversation can afford, into a particular discipline. So this week we're going to talk about fasting. I wanted to start off talking about fasting because I think it's in the season of Lent that classically people will fast from things. So do y'all normally fast from anything in Lent season?
I do really always try.
Okay.
I can't say that I've always been successful. I will say last year I gave up the reels.
Okay.
And
like all of them on all social media?
Yes, on all social media, and it was really beneficial, and it's a habit that I have not really slipped back into.
Did you find your screen time drop drastically?
Yes.
It's amazing how you can just get lost in the scroll.
Yes, and I was way more productive at nighttime.
Look at you.
Yeah. So
very cool.
One success story.
Do you have anything that you're going to
drop
this
year? I don't know yet.
Or?
I have to think about it.
Okay.
I mean, we're there, so I need to decide.
Yeah.
So
Wes, what about you? Have you fasted from anything?
Yeah. Maybe a year or two ago, I fasted from social media.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last couple of years, I've been doing that, like Facebook, Instagram. Those are the main ones that I used. But then as soon as, Easter rolls around, I would get back on it. And last year, especially, I was just I just realized, and Twitter, I think too, is what I used. I just realized how just toxic it was and how gross I felt. And so I just completely got rid of all social media, and I've never gone back.
Does that feel good?
I do get on Facebook on my computer sometimes, but nothing's on my phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it feels, it's great.
Mentally, it feels clearer. It feels less...
It's definitely not as wasteful of my time. But I just think there's a lot of that comparison trap and
totally.
just, a lot of fear mongering and just crazy kind of political stuff that, makes me, there's a lot of things that are trying to inspire outrage. And I'm outrageous enough as it is. So, it's just one of those things. I just don't need more. And I always give up alcohol too, over Lent, just because, not that I'm this heavy drinker or whatever, but it just as far as a food thing goes, or food or drink or whatever, I that's the hardest thing for me to give up is food. People who, we'll talk about this, I guess, but fasting from food.
Mm-hmm.
That's always I'm going to fast today. And I'm going to fast lunch today. And then lunchtime rolls around and I'm I have to eat. I'm so hungry. You just realize how dependent you are on food.
Yeah.
But I don't know, just in biblically, wine or alcohol or whatever is kind of seen as this joyful celebrant kind of thing. And it just seems in a time of Lent that is more fasting and more a contemplative. Yeah, really looking at our heart and soul and just taking away things that we don't need.
Yeah. There's a soberness to Lent that just naturally inherent in the church calendar.
In all steps of life. So that's always something I naturally do. I used to give up video games pretty often.
Yeah.
But I need those now for me time. So, but yeah, that was a big thing in college. But just anything that I feel has a hold on my life or I don't want to have a hold on my life, I try to fast from that.
Right. One year for Lent, I limited my, I guess wardrobe is the right term, to 40 items. So belts, shoes, hats, shirts, pants.
Bro, what were you running before 40?
I mean, if you think of your whole closet and all of your drawers of dresser, right? I'm not saying I would wear 40. Are you thinking I would wear 40 items of clothing every day? Is that what you're
No.
I think he's amazed that you have more than 40 items.
You're like, I'm limiting myself to 40. I'm like, good Lord.
I think if you took into
same
account
belt every day,
every hat that you wear, think about if you go running in the morning and then you go to work and then you like come home and put on PJs, like you've already gone through like 12 items of clothing, right?
So you just wore one item all day?
No, I just had like one pair of running shorts that I was limited to, or like
for 40 days,
4 or 5 work shirts and like 3 pairs of pants.
I'm wondering, where does the number 40 come from?
There's 40 days in Lent.
So
I knew that.
So 40. No, I knew that. So I thought
it just felt like an arbitrary number. It felt
40,
limiting.
I'm limiting myself to 40.
Dude, I've got more than 40 shirts. You know, like
listen. You are a good-looking man, and you.
We can cut this out of the podcast.
No, you're put together. Like I'm more one of those like. I've got clothes in my closet, but I wear like 4 things repeatedly. Like I wear the same shirts every week.
So it wouldn't be like a serious drop for some people. But for me, I found like I would stand in front of my closet looking at shirts going like, I don't want to wear that one. I don't want to wear that one. I wore that one last week. And it just felt the time wasted.
Just minimizing distraction.
So like just as like
I'm
for me, if I let go of video games,
know?
like I don't own any kind of video game console. I don't ever play them. So it like wouldn't be
I feel like that's a personal attack.
I mean, I feel personally attacked in the clothing region. I think when we talk about like our sacrifice or our fasting that we're doing for Lent, like whatever we're dropping, right? It should feel like we are sacrificing something, right? It should feel like there's it's tough for us to drop this thing. So like if you don't normally drink coffee every morning and you're like, oh, I'm gonna fast from caffeine, like that may not be as big of a fast, right? For somebody that drinks 6 cups a day and an energy drink and that kind of thing. But really, when we're fasting, whether we're letting go of social media or video games or alcohol or like limiting our wardrobe, it's also that if we can drop these things that we feel like are too heavy in our lives or carrying too much weight in our life, it's so that we can pick up more of Christ, right? It's so that we can tune our hearts more to Him, that we can focus on Him during those times. So like you mentioned, the food fast, when people will not eat for say 24 hours, and that's, you know, whether that's from lunch until the next lunch or dinner until the next dinner, however long. The whole goal is not that like you would go on your lunch break, sit around with all the people who are eating lunch around you and you just like sit there and pine and like mouth watering at all of the food that they're eating, right? Like it's not like self-flagellation. But the goal would be that you would like devote that time and that you would be eating or preparing your meal or doing those kinds of things to focusing on God.
Well, I think that's why fasting of all the disciplines might be the purest in the sense of like what we are, like we do the disciplines to die to the flesh. You know, like we don't do disciplines because it gives us extra credit or because it, you know, makes God like us more or whatever. We do all the disciplines we do them because, you know, Galatians 5 that our flesh is opposed to the spirit. And so we do these things to die to the flesh to give room for the spirit to come and move in. And I feel like I said earlier about food, like when you go to give up a meal, like you realize very quickly how dependent you are on this like physical substance,
right?
And how kind of weak we are and how our body, so I just feel like fasting is kind of the purest, food fasting especially is like the purest in that, in that sense that you really feel it in your body.
Well, it's when we are dying to our flesh, that we're really kind of releasing a sense of control over our lives. So when it's, hey, this time every day, I just naturally pick up my phone and I start scrolling. Like I know the muscle memory of like scrolling up, clicking on the app, right, and just start scrolling, and it becomes like a subconscious thing, right? That you just pick up and you're like, all right, it's this time of day. I'm going to go reach in the fridge and grab a beer or whatever it may be. And we find that control or like that desire for control, we find that like really awakened in us when we can no longer do that or when we are abstaining from doing those things. In giving up clothes, when I would just look at 4 different shirts and be like, well, pretty easy decision here. Like, which one did I wear 4 days ago? You know, like that was the one. And so it's just the mental time, the energy, the effort, the control that's put into like all of those habits is hopefully turning towards Christ, towards more spiritual disciplines and seeking him in prayer. If we want to take through like, hey, rather than scrolling or rather than, you know, eating today, I want to pray for my lunch break, or I want to read the scriptures for my lunch break, or whatever it may be. What are some other ideas of things that, like, if we're putting this worldly thing down or this fleshly desire down, we're picking up more of Christ? What do we mean when we say like picking up more of Christ, or like pursuing him more because we've put this thing down? What do you think?
It's like you said, like earlier when you're talking, like, I think the like, kind of hidden thing about disciplines is desire. You know, like you have to want Jesus and desire Christ, and that's why you do the disciplines.
Yeah.
If not, that's when we get into just like religiosity and
like this give and this take. If I do these things, I will be blessed in this way.
Yeah, and I think so many of us, I know for myself, like we kind of grew up in church settings where it really came across as like, if you do your devotion every day, you know, read your Bible and pray, then like, you know, you're going to be good with God or whatever. And like, you know, you can like read your Bible and pray and your heart not be in it.
Absolutely.
Whatsoever, you know, and there's just so many things. There's so many parts in the Bible, not just in the New Testament, the Old Testament, you know, talking about like the sacrificial system and all this stuff. And God's like, I don't want your sacrifices. I don't want your festivals. I don't want all these things because your heart is far from me. You do these things, but then your life doesn't look like it. So it's all about, to me, it's all about desire.
Right.
When it's recognizing too, I think where your time and space is being filled, and even, I mean, like giving up reels sounds really silly, but realizing at nighttime while my husband's putting my daughter to bed, that's kind of like my alone time. And I mean, and a whole hour would go by and there would be like things left to do, or, hey, I haven't spent any time with the Lord today. And so I think it's just that mindset of changing, that I really do want to devote this time with the Holy Spirit, time in the quiet, and not the distractions.
Yeah.
And then even I think with food, I'll go through seasons where I'll give up sweets. I really enjoy a sweet.
Same.
Yeah. And so even that mindset of like, oh, I finished supper, I need something sweet. And then just kind of changing I don't have to have that.
Yeah.
I don't have to do that. And so
I've thought about giving up sweets for Lent before. That feels like too much of a sacrifice.
It's hard.
I mean, it's
really hard.
I've also thought about giving up like red meat before.
Oh.
I'm like, oof, I don't know if I could do
Mr.
that
Hunter,
either.
I don't know that you could do that.
But yeah, you make a good point of like this idea of me time that we add into our days, and we're like, oh, I need my time, you know, alone on a run, or I need my time, you know, in the bath at night, or watching Netflix or whatever it may be, right? We have this idea of me time, and we kind of prioritize that. And not that that's bad, right? Especially for those who are introverts and need some quiet and need some alone time and just to be still and be alone. But when we fast, it offers us an opportunity to invite God into that time, right? To say like, I know people who eat their lunch break like in their car, and they, you know, listen to a podcast, or hey, maybe you're listening to this podcast on your lunch break.
I bet they are.
Maybe so. But that people will sit in their car and they kind of have like a quiet and just alone time. What would it look like just to invite God into that through the fasting of, I'm not focused on eating, or I'm not focused on going and getting food or running an errand real quick, but I'm just going to sit in my car and spend some time with the Lord rather than just having this me time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Cause I think we all live busy lives, and there's always a place, like we all need to have kind of some like healthy distractions and like things to take our mind off work or those like stresses of parenting or whatever.
Right.
But at the same time, I think one of the things fasting does is it helps us to make things, it kind of helps identify and take away our idols, because we tend to make some things the ultimate things instead of God. And so, and sometimes like those things, I don't know if it was Calvin or Martin Luther who said the human heart is an idol making factory. That we just tend to take these things, these earthly things, and kind of make them like the ultimate thing, you know, like I've had so many hobbies. I'm a hobby guy, like I get into hunting, I get into running, I get into, cycling now or whatever. And I have a tendency to like take the thing and like, I'm all in, this is my identity. This is what I want to do. And then eventually, it leaves you destitute eventually because, it's not God,
Right.
we make these things God. And so whatever that is, fasting is a good way to remind ourselves that those things aren't ultimate, that God is the ultimate thing.
Right. And so just like we talked about, for some, fasting from video games or fasting from alcohol or caffeine, like, isn't a big sacrifice. There are other things that we would say, like, let's not fast from those things. Like if you're looking at your time and you're looking at like how your day breaks down, and you're like, I want to make a big sacrifice, so I'm gonna stop being a present father, and instead of like playing with my kids in the evening, I'm gonna go read the Bible. Like,
I'm gonna fast from my kids for 40 days. That'd be great.
Or like, man, work just really wears me out, and so I'm just fasting from work. And I don't think that would fly. I don't think that's.
You don't think we could fast from Sunday mornings?
I don't know that our bosses would love that fast.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
So there are still things that we would say like are of utmost importance, that you still pursue these things, you still do these things. These are healthy. So like for somebody who is really cares about their physical fitness, and maybe they work out every day, or they run or lift or cycle or do whatever, we would say it might have risen to a point of being an idol in your life, but it is also probably just a helpful hobby for you, or a helpful thing as a part of your life.
Sure.
So maybe don't fast from it like altogether.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you've got this balance, right, of like identifying the idols in our life, or like identifying a thing that maybe we've given too much credence or too much time, too much energy, and then slimming it down in the proper way.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely low key judge some people when they tell me like what they're giving up for Lent. They're like, I'm like, we're gonna give up something like real and
You mean
hard,
like
and,
you judged how I gave up
yes, that's
everything but 40 items of clothing?
No, I just had questions. That was all. I just had questions. You're such a more meticulously dressed person than me. I'm basically like a caveman when it comes to clothing.
I think you were amazed he had 40 items.
Yeah, I'm like, wow. Like, I just, sometimes I lack understanding.
Different strokes for different folks.
Yeah, no,
right.
man. But yeah, like, you like, I'm gonna give up this like thing that whatever that like helps me like really. And people were like, I'm gonna give up,
Reels.
No, that is a real. The social media is a real legitimate thing. But now, like,
yeah, it is one of the things that easily becomes an idol in our life, that we become comparative
I'm
to,
giving up,
or
like fried food, or I'm giving up, sweets. No, sorry, whatever. No, like those are all really good and important things. And I'm a horrible person for being judgmental because, and whatever, like some things seem trivial, but what's trivial to me is not necessarily trivial to somebody else. And like,
I've never had to give up video games.
Yeah, and then that does sound really trivial.
She's too addicted to them. She cannot do it.
Yeah, I've never given them up.
Too many video games.
I'm clutching every to that. Yeah, no, I mean it might sound silly to one person, but we all are different, and different things hold us in different ways.
Right. There are different things that hold back our hearts from giving it all to Christ. And as you talked about, like it is ultimately the posture of our hearts that we are correcting, we are moving back to Christ, we're hopefully going back to Him. It's just by changing kind of what our hands are doing that we're changing what our hearts are doing. Mm-hmm. So if we find that our hands are taken up by scrolling, or our hands are taken up by video games, that we find an opening now for our heart to like pursue after Christ. I think that it's when we talk about our fast, or when we talk about like what we're giving up for Lent, like it's pretty well guaranteed that most Ash Wednesdays you're going to scroll through Facebook and see the like, hey, I'm going to be off Facebook until Easter, and it's like just a notice of like, if you really need me, get in touch with me. I've never been like so important that I needed to like let people know. Like,
yeah.
I think most people will just text me or call me.
3 posts a year will really be missed.
But there is sorry, Jess.
Well, I do think there is something about the privacy of what you're giving up, because I do kind of feel like that is between you and the Lord, and what is your thing and my thing are two totally different things. And I don't know. I do think there is just something about some of that is sacrificial when you know that that's what you're doing.
Right.
And I don't have to necessarily broadcast it.
Yeah, we don't have to tell anybody. And that's really in Matthew 6, what Jesus says is like, don't, when you're fasting, you don't have to be like, woe is me. And,
Yes.
Tell everybody.
Put ash all over your face and
oh,
make it
so
this
hard.
big deal.
I'm so holy for fasting from this. But you just said something I think really profound. You're saying something about hands and heart. Do you remember exactly what you said?
Yeah, when we I don't remember. When we put down what our hands are doing, we open space in our
you were
hearts.
talking about what our hands are doing. Goes like shapes our heart and what our heart. Because I do think there's a reality too of what we do often shapes us.
Mm-hmm.
Like we when we fast from things, we are trying to like identify like here's things that maybe are malforming me rather than forming me in the image of Jesus.
Yeah.
But we can choose to do things that and in doing those things they form us. You know what I mean? Like if you do something enough, you might not naturally be someone who prays a lot, whatever, but if you do it enough, it's going to form you,
right?
And so I do think that's another aspect of a discipline, and like what you're saying is like taking away one thing that's taking up our time and replacing it with something else, saying like, hey, this thing, just as much as we can be formed in the image of Jesus, we can also be by the world and by the enemy malformed as well. And so when we take away one thing and pick up another thing, like you said, like what our hands are doing guides our heart often.
Right.
And so whatever we replace that with, with Jesus, I think can form us.
Well, I think you said even something when you talked about giving up social media of, Easter's here and then we return back to that habit. And I do think that is something for myself, when I do really kind of consider what I want to fast from, that it be lasting. And that I don't just set that goal of those 40 days and then I'm like, oh, I'm back.
I got to catch up on months of Facebook or whatever it is.
Like I haven't drank alcohol in 40 days. So.
Let's rage.
Yes. It's Easter, baby.
But I think like I want that to be lasting of what I've replaced and hopefully with more time with the Lord, but that I not just return back to that habit or to whatever it is that I've given up.
It helps you to ask the question, do I really need this?
Exactly. Have I really missed it? And so...
Right. Yeah, because the ultimate goal is not that you would pick it back up and follow in the same thing and the same patterns, because it's a learned trait. Whatever it may be that we find has been an idol in our life, it's not all of a sudden, right? It's a slow progression, a learned thing that has slowly risen to the top ranks of priority in our life. And the same can be true for reading scripture, that it may feel really difficult at first to like sit down and focus and read and allow the Spirit to speak to you through His Word. But that's a learned trait. It's a thing that we can learn and grow in, just like prayer, just like any of these spiritual disciplines. So it's early enough in the season of Lent that maybe somebody hasn't picked up a thing that they want to let go of for Lent. Maybe they haven't identified a thing that they want to fast from. Do we have any tips or helpful? I mean, as we've already been talking about what fasting is and why we fast, are there any other thoughts or ideas that we have to help people identify, hey, maybe what is an idol? What's a thing that I've given too much energy or time or too much credence to in my life that's malforming me or like forming me in the image of the world?
I use the word distraction. Like, what is the distraction? Yeah. What is the conception of your thought about? And so I don't know. That's kind of how when I start to enter into that season of really trying to decide what is my distraction. So
of the goal to be more like Christ, or to pursue Christ more, what feels like a distraction in that goal, or what feels like a distraction? What takes away my attention from Him and time with Him? Right. Yeah. And at times it can be work, right? At times it could be like sports or something like that. But ultimately, what we're discussing is you can pursue Christ in those areas, right? You can pursue Christ in your work as a husband or a wife or a mother or a father. You can pursue Christ, look more like Him in those things. We're not saying drop those things, but we are saying the things that are a distraction to you that can't be used to shape you in the image of Christ. Wes, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think distraction is a really good word. I'm just reminded, Jesus says in Matthew 6, your heart is where your treasure lies. And, that discussion is about money, but I think it applies to everything. Yeah. What are you treasuring the most? And we're called to love God with our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourself. And if if we're treasuring something else and our heart is somewhere else, that we're not doing those things. So I just think like, what are we making ultimate? Like, and I think in your free time when you're not working or doing like the things you have to do, what are you doing? You know, because those are the things that can kind of show us that.
You bring up a great point about how much Jesus talks about the desire for money and the love of money, and how antithetical that is to the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? How that can be such a distraction in our lives, just finances in general or money, and for good reasons. Like, we have a lot, and so we spend it, and we feel, you know, really blessed to have big vacations or like fancy nice things, or the other way, that it can feel like a burden at times and like there's never enough, and right, like this mentality of scarcity financially. I think that there are not as many people that we hear fasting from like a love of money, right? Or fasting from like frivolous spending for the sake of Lent, right? I mean, we hear that when someone's like, I'm on a spending freeze right now, I got to get finances back under control or whatever it may be.
The government's coming for me. You know,
yeah, I'm being audited or whatever it is.
The collection agency. I'm being forced to freeze my spending right now.
Right. There are like financial circumstances in which we are forced to do that out of season. But what would it look like in Lent to say like, this thing that has become an idol? Maybe it's finances for some people. Maybe it's particular status, or, you know, a hobby that is particularly expensive, or whatever it may be, that they say like, if I were to break from that and pick up something of Christ to pursue him instead of those things, what freedom could be found in that?
Yeah, you remind me, Dallas Willard has a book called The Spirit of the Disciplines. And in that book, one of the disciplines he talks about, it's a great book, you know, I definitely would recommend people check out. But he talks about, you know, just like living a more, a life where like you one of the things you could fast from is spending, you know, and like saying like, you know, for these 40 days, I'm not going to buy like non-essentials, you know, like stuff I have to.
Not for the sake of like the Dave Ramsey plan and like getting your budget back together and all that kind of stuff.
Not even to save money necessarily, but like, you know, that it says something about us. And I think as Americans and consumeristic culture we have, like, you know, the needing more and more and more, like having 40 plus items of clothing. And I'm just playing. But no, like, you know, there's always, you know, I'm always looking, like with my hobbies, you know, like I'm always like, I need this gear, I need this for this or whatever. And, you know, like we don't need those things. And so, like just disciplining ourselves to not spend money can be a really helpful thing.
Well, you lead us kind of naturally into our very last segment of each of these podcasts. We want to give you some helpful book recommendations just as we close out, not for like required reading or whatever, but I know that there are particular disciplines, as we'll talk about in this series, that will be big and expansive, and we can't really cover it in a 20, 30-minute conversation here. And so if you are curious about what that, if you have more questions about what it looks like, those types of things. So Wes, will you recommend your book one more time? We say the name of it. The
Spirit of the Disciplines by Dallas Willard.
There you go. If you want a book specifically on fasting to read, this book called Fasting for Spiritual Breakthrough by Elmer Towns. It's a great name, Elmer Towns. This is one that even our residents go through when they do a series and a study on particular fasts and types of fasts that you might find helpful as well to learn more about the discipline. Man, I'm so grateful for each of you and for our conversation. Thank you all for tuning in. We hope that you have an awesome week. If this podcast has been helpful to you or formative for you in your walk with Christ, our hope is that you would share it with somebody else, that you would like on whatever platform that you listen on, that you would tune in next week. See you later.
All right.